The next session is entitled Decoding Democracy, and it features 3 researchers who are funded by the European Research Council. From LSE, we have Michael Bruter, who's Professor of Political Science. From the University of Ghent, we have Emilie Caspar, who studies the science of decision-making. From the University of Amsterdam, we have Stefania Milan, who works on critical data analysis. And moderating this discussion, I'm delighted to announce that we have the Euronews European Affairs anchor, Méabh Mahon. So please welcome them all to stage.
Thank you so much, Adam, for that very kind introduction. I think we were all speechless watching that previous panel, so it's a very, very hard act to follow, but we will do our best and reflect really on what we have heard so far. We've heard what's at stake, and we're joined now by these fantastic academics who are working on these issues every day, going deep inside our minds, our brains, the data online, trying to figure out why these trends, why is the world as messed up, if you like, as it is. Well, as Adam says, my name is Méabh Mahon. I'm a reporter based here in Brussels, working for Euronews, reporting for over a decade now on the European Union, and of course, keeping a very close eye on those elections coming up in a couple of months in June. But we've heard as well today a lot about the elections taking place all across the world. And that's what this panel will focus on. What exactly is going through our minds when we go to the polls? And of course, what is the impact of the digital revolution having on people? So as Adam said, our 3 professors are of course recipients as well of European Research Council funding and been digging deep into all these issues. So the clock is ticking. We have 22 minutes together, so let's begin. Michael Bruter from France, Professor of Political Science at the London School of Economics and Director as well of the Electoral Psychology Observatory and the co-author of the book, Inside the Mind of a Voter. So that is my first question. What is inside our minds as we go to vote? Are we thinking about ourselves or are we thinking about the greater good?
Big questions, 22 minutes. If you were asking me how to engineer a bridge, everybody would be listening. The problem is that as you are asking me what goes on in the minds of people when they go to vote, many of the people in this room and many of the people watching us online will assume that they already know. And I have to start by thanking the European Research Council for funding people like us, because the science of the people, the science of the mind, is as complex as the science of the things. And when it comes to what goes on in the minds of people when they go to vote, we often assume that they will think about what's good for them. We often assume that they will think about who they want to represent them, what sort of policy they want to be taken in the country. But the reality is a lot more complex. And what we find in the research that Sarah Harrison and myself are doing at the Electoral Psychology Observatory is that when people go into the polling booth, when they are getting ready to cast their vote, they try to embrace a role. The first thing they think about is, what am I supposed to do here? You know, what's my role? How can I be a good citizen? And many people, and maybe that gives us a little bit of hope after the very difficult things that Maria and Alexandra talked about, I do think that most people try to be their best selves when they go inside the polling booth to cast a vote. They try to figure out how to be good citizens, how to do the right thing by their children and grandchildren, how to do the right thing by the rest of the community, and what the rest of the community wants from them.
But Michael, what triggers someone who perhaps all their life voted Labour and then suddenly they move to vote for the far right?
Well, I think that, first of all, one of the findings we have in our research is that about 20 to 30% of people make up or change their minds about how to vote within a week of the election, and half of them on election day. And when it comes to understanding what makes somebody decide to vote or not, or who to vote for, one of the problems that we face is that we think we know what democracy is about. Again, we think that it is about policy choices or representation. But increasingly, citizens have outgrown their democracy and want them to perform a whole range of different functions. They might want to signal that the system is not working. They might want to have a discussion with the rest of the citizens in their country. They might want to feel part of their community. They might want to feel listened to. They might want politicians to listen to them once every 4 or 5 years. And it's a mixture of all of those things which is going to make them decide who to vote for and whether to vote or not.
And that idea, Michael, that you mentioned there of feeling part of a community, that's part of your research, Emilie, Caspar, at the University of Ghent. This tendency for human beings to create groups. Tell us about your research and also about the threat that polarisation is having to democratic societies.
Yeah, thank you for the question, because, I mean, to live in a healthy democratic societies, we need to create and to enhance social cohesion. But for that, we need to stop separating people into groups. Human beings have this very famous tendency to just put people into cases, like by ethnicity, religion, nationality, whatever reasons. And we know from neuroscience research that it has deep impacts on the brain. The way your brain reacts when you consider someone as an out-group compared to your own in-group can influence your behaviors. For instance, there are brain regions associated with empathy that are less activated for the pain of others when you do not consider that they're part of it. And I think that to ensure that our societies can be more peaceful and that everyone can just be heard and have this feeling of belonging, we need to fight against this very basic and deeply ingrained biological process of separating people between each other. We have to make sure that all of them have the right position and can be heard in the same way.
But the reality... But the reality is, and you're probably observing this online, is that people are sticking to their same group. They're staying in their echo chamber. They're not listening to people that they don't get on with. And this is also proving to be problematic.
Yeah, in fact, what I miss in this picture is the power of data and the machines that thrive on data generation and circulation, which are platforms. And in fact, we have already heard Maria Ressa earlier saying it all. But really, what we are facing now is that the processes that you, Emilie, are talking about are amplified and monetized by social media platforms that not only through data they describe our reality, but they also contribute to shape it, contribute to steer it, contribute to these in-group, out-group dynamics that we are talking about, make some reality real and some more realities desirable or more desirable than others. So in a way, we have platforms where we hang out, we spend a lot of time today, which tend to monetize, even not just amplify, but thrive on our worst behaviors.
And speaking of worst behavior, we're seeing a lot of very destructive social movements online. They can be whipped up extremely fast. We saw before Christmas, for example, riots in Dublin, in my home city over in Ireland. People gathering on Telegram, and within 2 days later, there was similar groups gathering on Telegram in Lyon, gimmicking what they'd seen in Ireland.
Yeah, well, social media, again, amplify our probably worst tendencies for better and for worse. And the fact that you can mobilize so quickly is definitely unprecedented in the recent history of our world. To get a social movement, historically and still today, in fact, to have a social movement that is able to exert change, you need time. What happens on social media is instead of sort of mob-like behavior, when people are mobilized extremely fast, and what we call a movement, maybe sociologists might object, but it's something that moves, right? Moves very fast, rapidly grows, and equally rapidly decreases. But what happens in this case is that you're left with some debris, in a way, on the ground, right? But the good news, I think, just to try to steer the conversation also towards something a bit more positive, is that not all these debris, not all these leftovers of these rapid mobilizations are bad news for democracies. Sometimes think, for example, about Me Too. It also was boosted by social media and social media presence and content going viral. What we are left with is norm change. No one after that movement is able to speak in the same term, using the same terminology that they use right before that. So equally, so what is true is also that with movements that go rapidly up and rapidly down, we also have an acceleration of the process of norm change, which is actually positive for democracy. So not everything is lost.
Michael, would you agree with that? Because I know this idea of polarization in your research, you feel that that is something of the past. You don't sign up to that idea. You sign up to more this idea of hopelessness. Yes, yet anyone who's been reading the news today, for example, it's Super Tuesday over in the US, it's all about polarization. It's like the media has clung on to that word and just can't get rid of it.
Well, that's part of what I was telling you about what we think we know and should research a little bit more thoroughly, because the discourse is all about polarization. The parties, in a way, need and want polarization. Many institutions need and want polarization. The media likes to talk about polarization because it makes for very easy debates. But the people, in our view, and especially the young people, are no longer polarized, but more often hostile. The difference is that to be polarized, you very much dislike the people who do not believe like you, but you like the people who do believe like you. Young people nowadays are hostile, which means that they still dislike the people who don't believe like them, but they do no longer trust or like the people who even vote for the same party as them and have the same beliefs as them. And that creates very different problems for societies and very different problems for democracy. And the problem is all the harder that one of the things we find in our research is that this hostility is not really fueled by negative perceptions, in other words, disliking others, but negative mirror perceptions. In other words, everybody believes that the others dislike them. And this has a very disinhibiting effect because everybody feels that they are just defending themselves. And if you're defending yourself, there is no moral limit to what you can do to defend yourself. You're right? You're just trying to survive. And that transformation of polarization into hostility, especially among the younger communities, among younger people, and this shift from a problem of negative perceptions to a problem of negative mirror perceptions create challenges which, as democracies, we are not yet well equipped to deal with, and that's why the problems keep getting worse.
And Emilie, just going deep inside our brains, what role is fear playing when we're voting?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, for this in-group, out-group identity, there are different brain mechanisms that are at play. And what I'm afraid of, personally, when I hear at political parties communicating before a big election, for instance, many of them, they use our natural fear towards others to gain more votes. They will directly target some minority group, and I'm sure, hate speech, of course, is forbidden by law, but it's not even necessary to trigger fears in the brain of people. I'm sure that if I ask the audience, okay, what we were thinking about when I say, oh, those people will steal your jobs, or those people will threat your well-being, or whatever. Depending on the countries where we are from, we may all have this very automatic idea of what could be the target, what could be the minority that I would call into question. And when I'm looking at political debates in some countries, it's not hate speech. They will never use that. But they increase this group separation because they know it works, because they know that by playing with our inner fear of others, of out-group members, they will gain more votes. And I'm a bit afraid of that.
And not just politicians. In fact, if you take a look at the media landscape as well, Stefania, in countries like the United Kingdom, for example, you have very popular television channels like GB News, where you have the main anchor is the well-known Brexiteer, Nigel Farage, who was the head of the UKIP political group, normalizing these topics. I mean, have you seen this trend, and what should be done about it?
I hear you.
We're talking about the media and how...
The question, I couldn't hear it.
Just when you're with your students every day and you're discussing these trends, what you're seeing, how the media is normalizing this kind of hate speech, if you like.
Yeah, the problem is that what we see online ends up legitimizing our inner bad selves in a way, right? So, and in the moment in which we see other people sharing the same fear, the same hatred, the same hostility, then this ends up alimenting and boosting really the in-group and out-group dimension that both of you, in fact, were talking about. Now, the good news is that we have regulations for these things. You mentioned hate speech regulation. It's much more difficult to regulate emotions. So I agree with you when you say that polarization is probably a problem of the past, but we probably still have to stick to the idea of regulation, of polarization, because that's something that, at least in a way or another, is understandable to policymakers and to citizens alike.
And a little bit later, in fact, the European Commissioner for Values, Vera Jourova, will be up on stage. It's her job to try and regulate emotions or regulate all these things happening online. But Emilie, you've had a very busy couple of weeks. You're just back from Rwanda. Talk to us about your work with genocide perpetrators and also rescuers. What can we learn from them? What lessons can be learned for our democracies?
Yeah, so it's true that my main topic of research is more about perpetrators of genocide. And what we learn also from the literature and from history is that actually many of those events, like I'm mentioning mostly genocides, but they most of the time occur in very authoritative systems, which are at the opposite side of democracies. And what I'm trying to do is what is happening in the brain of those people who suddenly will just decide to kill another part of the population, to murder, to massacre another part of the population. What are the phenomena that are at play? And honestly, most of the time I'm very depressed about human nature, but that's probably because I work with many of populations who have done such atrocities. But one of my main research questions, and I'm trying to have this from a very scientific point of view, is to understand why when people follow orders, follow the directives of some authoritative figures, how is that possible that their behaviors may change that well? And I'm studying the brain for this. And I indeed see that there are a lot of effects of following orders. You may have less empathy for others, you feel less guilty, you feel less responsibility for what is happening. But in all this, I have indeed a week ago initiated some new research with genocide rescuers. The rescuers, they're not as frequent as the perpetrators most of the time. They do exist, but they're very rare to find. And I'm very impressed, actually. 8 days ago, I met the first genocide rescuers in Rwanda ever. And for neuroscientists, this is something like exceptional. We never meet those populations most of the time, but you have so much to learn about them because instead of falling prey to hateful propaganda, to orders from an authoritative government, instead of just participating with the others to the mass killings, they have been able to say no. They have been able to just say, to save life, actually, even at their own risks. And I think we have so much to learn about them. I mean, when I hear of their stories, it's so full of humanity. And just to have a rebound with what you have just said, it's interesting because many of them actually report this feeling of shared humanity. For them, there is no groups. All human beings are the same, and that's what guides them in their rescue efforts and rescue actions. And actually, for me, even if they are not numerous, they trigger a lot of hope on the fact that people can find a way to fight and to act for the good.
Thank you so much. We'll keep an eye on your research. We have a couple of minutes left, and I'd like to talk now about artificial intelligence. As we heard in the previous panel, Maria Ressa said it's been around for decades. We just really haven't noticed. But of course, existing social media channels were already used, we've seen in the past, to manipulate elections. We could mention Brexit, we could mention Donald Trump. But do you think that with AI, we will see disinformation on steroids? Stefania.
Probably yes, it's quite likely, in the sense that it has become much easier and quicker to produce fakes of very good quality. So things that for which you needed more computational power, much more design and software development expertise, you can do it really comfortably from your sofa. And I hope you're not going to do it tonight, but it is indeed a possibility. Now, the other problem is also that through the same channels, we can also distribute things much, much faster. So potentially, yes, we are facing a much bigger problem than before, and we are in the same way in which we were ill-equipped to distinguish facts from fiction and emotions on social media. We are still ill-equipped today. Now, to put things into perspective, even when cinema became available to people, you probably remember those videos, actually, of people running out of the theater, the movie theater, when they saw a train coming at them. So let's try not to have the same reaction looking at this big, complex problem that AI is putting on our table, and try not to be like those people escaping, and try to see whether something can be done, both from the policy and the educational point of view.
And Michael, would you agree, and also in your findings you say that we've outgrown our democracies, that they're no longer fit for purpose. Why? And what would be the alternative? And would it make our democracies more resilient against these threats?
Well, I mean, those are two very complementary questions. I mean, the resilience is important because increasingly our democracies are vulnerable to a lot of external threats: pandemics, environmental disasters, social media and artificial intelligence, potential attacks, terrorism, and so on. And the problem is that whenever those external threats appear, they increase inequality. And we need democracy to be really inclusive, because democracy only works if it's universal and if everyone is given a voice. But additionally, the reason why we citizens have outgrown democracy, and the reason why democracies are no longer fit for purpose, is that the whole point of democracy is to tell people, the system is yours. What do you want to use it for? And institutions were created largely on the basis of what we thought citizens would need in the 19th century, essentially. And now they've developed a whole range of new desires, new needs, and when they don't get those needs fulfilled, they feel, as Harrison would say, frustrated. Or worse, they can become hopeless. They become hopeless the moment they feel that it's not only they who are not getting what they need, but the children and grandchildren are no longer going to live better than they did.
And they feel like they're left outside the room. They feel like they're not being listened to.
And they feel that they are not being listened to and that they are inaudible, effectively. And to have a little bit of hope here, even though artificial intelligence is potentially a threat, it's also a wonderful opportunity for democracies to be better. Because what citizens resent very much in democracies is that they don't control the questions they are being answering. And they have lots of opinions about things, and they want to talk about a lot of things. And if we can use technology in the right way, we can capture all that opinion that exists and make sure that people express it democratically rather than in disruptive ways.
So one idea could be for a round of applause for Michael. So one idea could be to bring a citizens' assembly, for example, into a European Council summit by virtual reality? No? Crazy idea?
No, because democracy needs to remain universal. The reason why deliberative democracy is not a solution is precisely because there is hostility and people do not trust others to represent them. We need something that brings everyone back in. The young people, they want to speak. Young people, they are the least likely to use internet voting or postal voting because they want, when they are going to vote, they want to come to the polling station. They want to experience the real thing. People with mental disabilities, mental health issues, they don't want to vote remotely either. They want to be treated like equal citizens. So the solution can only bring everyone in the table again.
So they want to be physically in the room. We're running out of time, but do you want to weigh in there?
Yeah, the problem that we are facing is that technology is actually not going to solve this problem because platforms are not designed for democracy. So, well, I guess the conversation has to continue, but luckily we can leave the room and leave the real experts to solve it.
And the question is, do you take the battle for democracy onto the platforms where the audiences are? Because the reality is, and as we heard last night on this very stage as well in Beaux-Arts, when 5 MEPs discussed how they will try to galvanize voters ahead of those elections, they need to be on TikTok And TikTok is, of course, the elephant in the room. But I'm going to have to leave it there. We have run out of time, but a very, very warm welcome to our professors, Emilie Caspar, Michael Pruter, and Stefania Milan, for your fascinating interventions. And thank you so much to our audience.